David McGreavy, often referred to as the Friday the 13th killer, is responsible for one of the grisliest, most horrendous crimes in British history. Born into a military family in the 1950s, McGreavy travelled extensively during his childhood, living through England and Germany. After leaving school, he attempted to follow his father's footsteps and signed up to the Royal Navy and started a serious relationship that led to an engagement. This didn't last long, however, as he found himself court-martialed for starting a fire that caused significant damage. He was forced to move back in with his parents, and things began to spiral for David McGreavy. He began to drink heavily, which meant that he found it increasingly difficult to stay in work as he bounced from job to job. His fiancée left him, and eventually his parents could not cope with his chaotic drinking and kicked him out of the house. David McGreavy was taken in by an old friend, Clive Ralph, and his wife Elsie Ralph in 1972. They were a married couple with two small children, Paul and Dawn Marie, as well as a third on the way. McGreavy found work in a local factory and paid the Ralphs £6 a week in rent, as well as helping cook meals and occasionally babysit the children. When the third child, Samantha, was born, Clive Ralph was working as a lorry driver for his father's firm, and Elsie Ralph found work as a barmaid in a pub just down the road from their home. This wasn't an issue for the Ralphs, as their lodger, David McGreavy, was like a father to her children, to use Elsie's own words. McGreavy began to look after the children more and more and appeared to everyone as someone that loved the children. Things were going well for the Ralph family. This all changed on Friday, April the 13th, 1973. I will warn you that this next section is very graphic and distressing. Please listen on at your own risk. While babysitting the children, David McGreavy, who had been drinking heavily, became enraged at 1-year-old Samantha, who'd been crying for her bottle. McGreavy grabbed Samantha by the throat and squeezed until she couldn't cry anymore. He also hit her with a blunt object and fractured her skull. He then proceeded to slit 2-year-old Dawn's throat and strangle 4-year-old Paul to death using a piece of wire. After murdering the 3 children, David McGreavy went down to the basement to retrieve a pitchfork. He used the pitchfork to mutilate the bodies of the 3 children, leaving blood and viscera everywhere. Debating whether or not to bury the children, he made the life-scarring decision to take the mutilated bodies of the children outside and to impale them on the wrought iron fence in the garden for the neighbours to find. He then left the home and began to aimlessly walk the streets. By the time Clive and Elsie Ralph came home, the bodies had already been found, and the police had cordoned off the Ralph home, refusing to allow the parents to see the remains of their children. David McGreavy was arrested later that night and owned up to the killings. He offered no motive, other than being irritated by the sound of the baby crying. 2 months after the murders, David McGreavy sat in court and was sentenced to multiple life sentences with a minimum of 20 years to be served. The deliberation came after only 8 minutes, as he had no defence, no motive, and no case of diminished responsibility. David McGreavy had been in prison since 1973, a total of 45 years. In that time he's been the subject of countless media pieces trying to piece together why he brutally killed 3 children that he supposedly cared for. As of December 2018, he has been back in the news after it came to light that David McGreavy has been cleared for release by a parole board who've determined him to be a considerably changed man. The 67-year-old will be freed sometime in 2019. Elsie Ralph, who's now also in her late 60s, has stated that she feels betrayed after a judge promised her that McGreavy would be behind bars for the rest of his life. David McGreavy took everything from the Ralphs: their children, their home, their marriage, and their future. Yet he will walk the streets and experience freedom for the remainder of his life. Whether that is right and just, though, is an argument for another time. Please subscribe to the channel and leave your thoughts on the case and parole board's rulings in the comments below. I'll try to go through them and answer if I can.
Well, he broke up my marriage to start off with. I was never allowed to go back into the property that I lived in with the children because of what happened. I had to move away from the area because of the people, the looks I would get from people, plus the thoughts I had in my own head that it was my fault because I left the children and went to work that night.